Everybody here for class on this Lord's Day. Philip and Lee are still real sick. Lee has gotten pneumonia, and Philip has bronchitis and something else. They went to the doctor and were tested for RSV and some other things, and they'll have the results of those tests tomorrow or Tuesday. But they're both very sick, still running temperature, and so we need to keep them in our prayers. It seems that their experience with the COVID virus is that it costs them a whole lot of their natural immunity to anything else. And this RSV stuff is going around, and it can be, for older people, it can be very serious. So we need to keep them in our prayers. To class on Wednesday evening, we were talking about Jesus being now in the last, getting toward the, well, he's in the last year of his life, and it's moving toward Jerusalem from the area of Galilee. He came back from the last retirement, and in that last retirement, let's do it this way. Let's talk about the periods in Jesus' life, and then we'll narrow this down. What's the first period of life of Jesus, Charles?
Years of preparation.
Years of preparation, and about how long was that? Okay, and then the second period, Richard?
Baptism and started his first ministry.
The beginning of the ministry, beginning with the baptism of Jesus by John down in the region beyond Jordan. Then he spent about 2 years in what area, Janet?
Galilee.
The Great Galilean Ministry is Brother Walden called it in his book. And then the period of retirement. And about how long did that last, Sandra?
About 6 months.
About 6 months. And so when the feast of the Jews, early in the spring, they had a feast called Purim, which was a national feast, but not instituted by God. It was a celebration of the deliverance from the Persians by Esther and Mordecai. And then the Passover was sometime between in our months of March or April. And it was a very tedious process for them to decide exactly what day the Feast of Passover was on. But then after Passover, what was the next feast, Patty?
Feast of Dedication?
No, there was one more. After 50 days after the feast of the Passover feast, 50 Pentecost, and then that was in 50 days after the scheduled feast, sometime in March and April, and then the feast of David, the feast of
Dedication?
no,
Tabernacle?
Tabernacles. Sometimes the Feast of Booths, sometimes it's called the Feast of Atonement. It was a 7-day feast, and at the end of the 7 days, the annual sacrifice was offered for the sins of Israel. And then the Feast of Dedication was the last one. And what was the purpose of that feast, Landon? Hanukkah?
Yeah, wait, maybe draw a blank here.
Help him out, Cooper.
Dedication of the temple.
The temple and everything with that.
It was celebrated the cleansing of the temple,
Yes.
and during the period of the Maccabees, after the remnants of the Greek Empire had offered swine on the altar in the temple, and it's called the Feast of Lights or Hanukkah nowadays. And it seems like to me, the thing's publicized on the television and things you hear, that Hanukkah is maybe more important than the Feast of the Passover, and that would be to the general Jewish population, which are Reformed Jews, and the Jewish groups that follow the law more closely, the Orthodox. They would have the same ranking, for lack of a better word, of the feast. They would think the Feast of Passover was the most important. And of course, it was important to the Jews when they were released from Egypt, and they kept it. And I'm told that even today, when families, it's more of a family celebration than a national celebration, because they don't have a temple to go offer that feast at. And since the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70, but I'm told that when they have that feast in their families, the last thing they say when they part is next year in Jerusalem. So the Orthodox thinking Jews still are thinking about the restoration of Israel as the capital city, and the nation once again being a powerful political power. And but in this last year of Jesus' life, if we talk about the third Passover, let me get this slide up here. Outline of Jesus' life can be, if you use the Passovers, the first Passover mentioned in John chapter 2, after Jesus had just begun his ministry, went up into Galilee and then came back, and he cleansed the temple at that Passover. It's mentioned here. And then he began preaching Judea, and John chapter 5 and verse 1 mentions another Passover. And after the second Passover, Jesus left and went he had a conference with Nicodemus at that Passover, and he went through Samaria back to Galilee. And then the third Passover, if this chronology we're using is correct, mentioned in John chapter 6 and verse 4, is the Passover that Jesus and his disciples spent, and they would have been beginning the period of retirement during that Passover feast. And of course, the fourth Passover is the Passover in which he was crucified. And so we're talking about this last year of Jesus' life, the Passover in April, Pentecost in June, and it's the time now that we've been talking about in the last couple of classes, is this Feast of Atonement that's mentioned in John chapter 7. And I'd like to say, the way we've been studying, and the Waldron book and Phillips book, they differ just a little, and basically they're close, but there's really not any way to tell exactly how those last let me read this note on the chronology of Luke and John. One of the difficulties in the study of a chronology of the gospel accounts is to decide how the information in Luke 9:51 through 18:30 fits with the other accounts. Luke 9:51 says, when the time was come that he should be received up, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. And so some scholars say this is the beginning of the final trip to Jerusalem. But there are other mentions that Brother Walter mentioned here. He says this idea is contradicted by Luke 10:38 through 42, which indicates Jesus was just outside Jerusalem. By Luke 13:22, which refers to his journey to Jerusalem, and by Luke 17:11, which refers to another journey to Jerusalem. Also, it is in Luke 18:31 through 34 that Jesus tells his disciples, we go up to Jerusalem, and all the things that are written through the prophets to be accomplished unto the Son of Man. So the way that I understand this, after the fourth retirement, they're back in Galilee, and Jesus knows it's only about a year now, and his life and his work will be over. During the retirement, Jesus expressed to his disciples several times, I must go up and be offered up by the scribes and Pharisees. They're going to hurt me, they're going to kill me, and then I'll be raised up the third day. And when Jesus said those things on one of the first occasions, Peter says, no, Lord, that's not you. And that's when Jesus said, get thee behind me, Satan. And because they did not fully understand yet the spiritual nature of the kingdom of Christ, and they could not be saved and have a royal leader like David, the Messiah on David's throne could not be there, freeing them from the Roman oppression and restoring the political kingdom to Israel. That was not possible, was it? And so Jesus was not working. Jesus is working in the spiritual realm, and the apostles think it is still in the physical realm. Even until the day Jesus was ascended in Acts, they were with him. He was about to ascend into heaven, and they said, Lord, at this time do you restore the kingdom to Israel? They had not yet, that light had not come on in their minds. But after the day of Pentecost, and the baptism of the Holy Spirit came on them, they understood better. But still, the broadness of the appeal of the gospel was where God promised Abraham that in thy seed all the nations of the earth will be blessed, in Genesis chapter 12, the first few verses. And so for that to happen, all peoples had to be included in the kingdom. And until Peter saw the vision offered by God showing him that Cornelius could hear the gospel, and the gospel being preached to a Gentile the first time, and Gentiles being baptized into the kingdom of Christ, then it was clearer. And even Paul in his writings talks about the mystery of foretime, that in the book of Ephesians, and the mystery was that the Gentiles would be included in the salvation offered by Christ. And even at that time, 50 years after the death of Christ, the Jews that were resisting Paul, that's what they thought. The Gentiles are not part of this. And then they tried to, the Jewish, some of them that were Christians, tried to enforce circumcision on the Gentiles. And so that idea of the old law clinging on, it held on a long time, even into early years of the church and the gospel being taught. So we have Jesus then operating on this plane of spirituality, and the apostles and the people he was trying to teach, they're down here. They don't get the message. And Jesus begins almost all his teaching talking about he's the Son and the Father's with him, and he came from the Father. And what do they want to do to him, Farron, when he says that kind of thing?
They wanted to make him king.
Well, on one occasion they did, when he...
But the Jews wanted to kill him.
when he fed the 5,000. I guess that was beginning of the retirement period. He went over into Bethsaida, Judas, across the Sea of Galilee, and fed 5,000, and the people were swarming around him. And then he went off on the mountain by himself because they were going to try to make him a king. Well, you know, what they were trying to do was foment a rebellion against existing authorities and have a rebellion against Rome. And here comes David to get on the white horse with all his power. Well, that's not true. Jesus avoided that, and then went on back into the area around the north end of the Sea of Galilee, and then off into the second period of retirement after that. And but the discourses between Jesus and his apostles, and between Jesus and the crowd that followed him, they began to be harder. Jesus was insisting on his sonship, and they were planning to kill him. And so in John chapter 7, we were talking about Wednesday night, in verse 1 there, it says, after these things, Jesus was walking in Galilee, for he was unwilling to walk in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Now at the feast of the Jews, the feast of the booths, was at hand. So Jesus was still separated even after the period of retirement. He was in Galilee. And at some point between now and the Feast of Dedication, he begins to travel south. The Feast of, not Dedication, the Feast of Booths, he began to travel south. And that's mentioned in Luke chapter 9, in 51, that we read from Brother Waldron's comments a while ago. And so, as we talked about it in a little bit of length on Wednesday night, Jesus' brothers insisted that he go to the Feast of Tabernacles and present himself as the Messiah, and they, at this point in time, don't even believe he's the Messiah. He said, if you know, they say, if you're the Messiah, come on down here and you get your act together and let everybody know this. But he says, your disciples also may behold your works which you're doing, for no one does anything in secret when he himself seeks to be known publicly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world. Not even his brothers were believing in him. Jesus said, my time is not here. Jesus knew the time, and you have to understand, I believe we have to understand, that in the mind of Jesus, he's preparing for his death. And, it's a few months, and he'll be offered up. And it was not anything that he looked forward to. He would do the Father's will and obey the Father, but being tortured by the Romans in crucifixion was not anything that anyone wanted to suffer. It was a thing for criminals and outlaws, and not for Jesus, who had done no wrong and would do no wrong. And so at this feast, here mentioned in John 7, let me make this text a little bigger so I can see it better. The rest of them went up, and it says it was the midst of the feast. Jesus went up into the temple and began to teach. So he went secretly after his brethren went. And so here he is now. Jesus goes to the temple, the center of everything that goes on religiously in the Jews' life in those days. And so here's the discussion about him. Jews were marveling, saying, how has this man become learned, never been educated? Jesus therefore answered and said, my teaching is not mine, but his who sent me. If any man is willing to do his will, he shall know of the teaching, whether it is of God or whether I speak for myself. He who speaks from himself seeks his own glory, but he who is seeking the glory of the one who sent him, he is true, and there's no unrighteousness in him. So Jesus begins to attack the premise of their thinking. Did not Moses give you the law, yet none of you carries out the law? Why do you seek to kill me? So Jesus knew they had his death in mind, and that Moses had prophesied there would come a prophet after him, and so they knew those things, and they were looking for a Messiah, but Jesus didn't fit their ticket. He didn't have the proper credentials for them, and he didn't have the same purpose in mind that they had in mind. And then he attacks their idea of working on the Sabbath. He says, don't you circumcise a man on the Sabbath? If a man receives circumcision on the Sabbath day, that the law of Moses may not be broken. That is, the male children were supposed to be circumcised on the 8th day, and if that happened to fall on the Sabbath, they went ahead and did that because it was fulfilling the law, and it was not working on the Sabbath when they did that. It was just doing what God wanted them to do, what God accepted. And so, are you angry with me because I made an entire man well on the Sabbath? Do not judge according to appearance, but judge with righteous judgment. And so, the people had an understanding here. They said, this is the man that the Jews are seeking to kill, and he's publicly speaking, and they're saying nothing to him. So Jesus presents himself in the temple at the Feast of Tabernacles and begins to attack their ideas of what was lawful on the Sabbath and what was not lawful. And so it's interesting on this occasion it says he is speaking publicly and they're saying nothing to him. The rulers do not really know that this is the Christ, do they? So here you go. You're a Pharisee of the strictest sect of the Jews, and you walking around in your garments that glorify your position, and you have this rebel teaching in the temple, and the people are saying they don't know. And so you see the conflict that is building in their minds, and Jesus is just directly going after that spirit they have and trying to convince them that he was the Messiah. I have not come of myself, but he who sent me is true, whom you do not know. I know him because I am from him, and he sent me. They were seeking, therefore, to seize him, and no man laid his hand on him, because his hour had not yet come. But many of the multitude believed in him, and they were saying, when the Christ shall come, he will not perform more signs than those which this man has with him. The Pharisees heard the multitude muttering these things about him, and the chief priests and Pharisees sent officers to seize him. And so, and this is the occasion when they went to seize him, and they said, well, why didn't you get him? He said, when never man so spake, or one of the occasions. And then Jesus made the statement, you will seek me and will not find me, and where I am you cannot come. And they tried to say that he was going off to the Greeks, the dispersion among the Greeks over across on the east side of the Jordan. And but the last day of the feast, verse 37 of John chapter 7, Jesus stood and cried out, saying, if any man is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being shall flow rivers of living water. But this he spoke of the Spirit, whom those who believed in him were to receive, for the Spirit was not yet given, because Jesus was not yet glorified. And so the people began to say, this has got to be the prophet, and some say, no, it's not. And they know that he was a poor man, and some of them know that he came out of Galilee, and some, there was this discussion between the crowds and the people and the leadership. The leadership had already planned to kill Jesus. They'd already planned to kill Jesus. And so, you have not also been led astray, have you? A Pharisee asked the soldiers they sent to take him. No one of the rulers of the Pharisees has believed him, has he? Is that true, Landon? That no rulers of the Pharisees had believed in Jesus at that time?
No, I think they did believe. They just didn't want to believe who he really was, because he infringed on their power and their political scene and all of that.
The name that pops in my house is because his name pops up in the next sentence here. It says, Nicodemus said to them, he who came to him before being one of them, our law does not judge a man unless it first hears from him and knows what he's doing, does it? And they answered and said, you are not also from Galilee, are you? Search and see that no prophet arises out of Galilee. And everyone went to his home. So this is on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles in Jerusalem. And this is about 6 months before the next Passover in the next spring, before Jesus is crucified. And so the means and terminology that is used, let's see, John continues to record some instances that happened from the period of the Feast of Tabernacles, John 7 through about 20 verses down in John chapter 10, records some events that have happened in discourses that went through, and Philip has already talked about some of these in detail. The Good Shepherd, and how the sheep know his name, and he is one who can call them, and they recognize his name. And but in John chapter 11 introduces the sickness and death of Lazarus. When the sickness and death of Lazarus took place sometime after the Feast of Tabernacles and before Jesus was on his last week of life, going into Jerusalem. And so we want to bring that in at the proper time. So let's look at this. Jesus' ministry began the first Passover. At the second Passover, Jesus went up, and that's when he healed a man at the pool of Bethsaida, and they had conflicts over that. And Jesus was at the third Passover. It was beginning the periods of retirement, and since the events recorded after it announces that Passover, John 6 and verse 4. Since the next events take place in Galilee and on up into the region of Tyre and Sidon, as Jesus went through the retirement period, either Jesus went to Jerusalem for the third Passover, nothing is recorded about that event, or he did not attend the third Passover feast. It's 1 year at that Passover, and the period of retirement span the period between this third Passover and until Jesus is back in Jerusalem for the Feast of Tabernacles. And so the period of retirement end, and the close of Jesus' ministry has started. And this is just some passages certifying that Jesus was there, and then went up to the feast in secret. And this verse that we referred to in Luke 9:51, it came to pass when the days were well nigh come that he should be received up. He steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem. Sometime during the period of the time after the last retirement, and this Feast of Tabernacles, Jesus was still in Galilee and made that decision. John 7, Jesus walked in Galilee, but he would not walk in Judea because the Jews sought to kill him. And the Feast of Tabernacles were at hand. So that was the state of mind and the condition that Jesus and his apostles were in. And that would have been, the feast would have been October, Jesus' last year on earth, the Feast of Tabernacles. And so we talked about John 7, and these are the events that recorded in John 7 through John 10. Jesus taught in the temple, and then in John chapter 8, the woman taken in adultery. Jesus is the light of the world. The truth will make you free. The man born blind, John 9, 1 through 33. Jesus affirms his deity, and all these teaching sessions Jesus had with them. Sometimes they're altercations, and sometimes they're not that hard, but Jesus is leading with the thought that I'm deity, you're not, I'm the good shepherd. Those people who are leading you, they're not, they're wrong, and you need to follow the ones whose voice you hear. And turn to John chapter 10 in this. This is this last event covered in, this is still between the period of the Feast of Tabernacles and the Feast of Dedication. And, Philip has touched this in some detail. Jesus said, truly, truly, I say to you, I'm the door of the sheep. This is verse 7 of chapter 10. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I'm the door. If anyone enters through me, he shall be saved and shall go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I came that they might have life and might have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hireling and not a shepherd, and who is not the owner of the sheep, beholds a wolf coming, and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. And he flees because he's a hireling and not concerned about the sheep. I'm the good shepherd. I know my own. My own know me, even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and lay down my life for the sheep. These words Jesus is speaking to these people. He's affirming that he's the good shepherd. What are they wanting to hear, Farron?
Well, they're wanting to hear there's an earthly king that, as the shepherd, he's going to take them and raise up an army and overthrow the Romans.
They're saying, we know about sheep and shepherds. we know how that is.
Yeah, we don't want a shepherd, we want a king.
What about you? And then Jesus says, I'll lay down my life that I may take it again. No one has taken it away from me, but I'll lay it down on my own initiative. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from my Father. So he is telling them, yes, I will be placing my life on the cross for you. And then verse 19, it says, there arose a vision again among the Jews because of these words, and many of them say, he has a demon and is insane. Why do you listen to him? Others were saying, these are not the saying of one demon possessed. A demon cannot open the eyes of the blind, can he? And then the next sentence says, at the time of the Feast of Dedication, at that time, the Feast of Dedication took place in Jerusalem. So this period where Jesus was talking after the Feast of Tabernacles, then the place and time has changed from October to December with that sentence. And so there's a big jump in that. And so what happens at the Feast of Dedication, here's Jesus again in the temple presenting himself as Solomon's porch. And I believe the last class Philip had, he was talking about this occasion and where Solomon's porch was on the temple. And I am the Father of one. In verse 31 then it says the Jews took up stones again to stone him, and Jesus answered them, I showed you many good works from the Father, for which of them are you stoning me? The Jews answered him, for a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy, because you being a man make yourself out to be God. Well, if Jesus were only a man, that would be right. That was the punishment for blasphemy under the law of Moses. Jesus answered him, has it not been written in your law, I said, ye are gods. If he called them gods whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, do you say of him whom the Father sanctified and sent into the world, you are blaspheming, because I said I am the Son of God. If you do not do the works of my Father, do not believe me. But if I do them, though you do not believe me, believe the works, that you may know and understand that the Father is in me, and I in the Father. Therefore they were seeking again to seize him. And he eluded their grasp. And the next sentence says he went away again beyond the Jordan to the place where John was first baptizing. And so Jesus moved away from them, out of Jerusalem, across the Jordan River into the area called Perea. And he is going to spend some more time, and he will be back and forth out of Perea into Judea, and before the final journey to Jerusalem for the Feast of the Passover in just a few months. And so we see all this discourse, and Philip passed out this sheet about that expression dealing with and the use of the word God in this context. He from the Psalm 82 in the context there is talking to the officials of the Jews, leaders, priests perhaps, of the Jews, and so they were referred to as gods with a little g, that meaning that they were above the commonplace people, that they were, at the time David wrote the song, the song was written, the people of the world were not, certainly not called gods. They were the enemies of God and enemies of Israel and the enemies of most everything good. And so he was comparing them and their work to God himself and the work among human beings, and he's not indicating by any stretch of the imagination that they were deity in any way. They were just people with authority. And so Jesus said even those people in those days that were the people of God use that term, and so how can you reject me because I am the Son of God and the works prove it? And I'll go back to Nicodemus again when, after the second Passover, he came to see Jesus, and he told Jesus, we know that thou art a teacher come from God. No man can do the things you do except God be with you. And so Nicodemus was one of the religious leadership, and it never says specifically that he was a believer, but he came to get the body of Jesus and bury it, and he in the incident just recently we read the passage where he spoke in behalf of Jesus ought to be heard, that according to the Jewish law, you needed to hear a man and have witnesses against him if you were going to condemn him to death. And they were ready to kill him, stone him on the spot without that. So then Jesus travels toward Jerusalem. It mentions in Luke 13:22 through 35. And in that context, some of the people warned him that Herod Antipas has intentions to kill him. And then I think that's the occasion where he said that fox, talking about Herod. And then in the last part of that context, he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. And he mourns over. We got a couple of minutes. Turn over to Luke 13, and we see what. Let me read that and not try to quote it. In verse 34. Let's start in verse 31. Just that time, some Pharisees came up and said, go away and depart from here, for Herod wants to kill you. He said to them, go and tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today, and tomorrow and the third day I'll reach my goal. Of course, they're referring to his crucifixion and resurrection. Nevertheless, I must journey on today and tomorrow and the next day, for it cannot be that a prophet should perish outside of Jerusalem. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children together, just as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not have it. Behold, your house is left to you desolate, and I say to you, you shall not see me until the time comes when you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So the Lord, even with all he knew that was going to happen to him and the attitudes of those people that were confronting him, he still had that the true love of God there, and their good in mind. Our time is up. Wednesday night, we'll talk about this time after the Feast of Dedication and Jesus teaching in the temple again. He retires to Korea, and some events there, and some teaching he did in Korea, and some parables taught there that are important parables, and then he travels toward Jerusalem, and sometime before the week of his crucifixion and this period of time that he spends again in Perea is when when Lazarus is healed. Appreciate your attention.